to conferences all the time is the main driver for progress in your skill set and also your relationship, and basically any professional can become a better professional by attending conferences.
It's not the standard, okay? It's a movie theater, but the visual is great and the sound is great, and I've seen a lot of room and space, and I think it's organized well.
Seeing all the people here today and they're excited about stuff, and you can see the energy and the desire to learn and do new things.
And I was positively surprised about the depth, the technical depth of the sessions, and how that makes the tester part of the team.
I think developers do benefit from coming to QA conferences, just the same as testers can benefit from going to dev conferences. You've got to have a broad understanding of what's going on.
It's really inclusive. I would say it's super diverse. People are really, really open and friendly, and it's really organized.
Conferences are well worthwhile just for the ideas that they spark in people. When people come back to the office, they're full of ideas and they're all energized up.
Hi, my name is Dawid Pacia. I work for Brainly and I come from Poland, Krakow. And since 7 years I'm connected with startups and product companies. During my presentation I will show you why BDD that emerged from test-driven development became so popular. I will show you not only good practices, but particularly how to avoid those bad ones. Please join. Hello everyone, welcome. Thursday morning. So yeah, it's Thursday already. Today I will talk about behavior-driven development and actually why and how not to hate it, because that's probably the concept you know very well, or most of you know very well. But from my experience, the biggest problem is that very often it's misunderstood, and after you try to introduce it and it fails, you start hating it. That was my story. It's actually fifth company I work for, and that's the first one that we introduced behavior-driven development approach in a good way, actually. But I think the biggest output from this for you is understanding when, at which situation, it's probably not the most suitable, not the best solution, because like every other framework, it doesn't fit all the context. So let's start. Yeah, actually my name is Dawid Pacia, as mentioned. Well, actually, why start thinking about behavior-driven development? So one of the few aspects you can achieve is to speed up and structure testing. The second one is gathering metrics towards risk mitigation and analysis, because you have structured way of defining cases, test cases, use cases, and then just analyze it. The third one, why you can think about it, is when you have no documentation. So you can just start creating test cases that you can use later. The fourth one is frequently changing requirements. So if you have to change your test, automated tests, because you have to follow the changing requirements, documentation. You all the time have to keep up to date. And the last one, yeah, it's the opportunity for further automation, but it's easy as the concept, and it's very easy to screw up it as well. But about it later. So let's think about classical approach. We have CEO, and then CEOs for the organization or the direction or whatever your company is focused on. We have it's breaking down into features, into requirements, and after that you have development. At the same time, you have QA working on test cases, and when you can merge and build some kind of increment, then you have QA and dev working closely together. It's a situation. From that, you have documentation in any form, and customer receiving that increment. So that's quite normal. What BDD, and why do we think about it? Why it can be suitable? But at first, because if we want to explain why and how not to hate it, we should understand it from the scratch. So actually, that's done and it created the concept, and it's very short definition when we talk about the BDD explanation. So we just explain the behavior of our from the perspective of its stakeholders. And by stakeholder, well, we can understand customer, we can understand user, talk about product, or whoever is interested in our product. But it's very bad idea to talk about behavior-driven development without introduction to test-driven development, which sure of that. And test-driven development is, I think, very well known as well, but surprisingly rarely introduced at the organization. So it's much earlier concept. And I have a definition from 2003. But actually, it was mentioned even earlier by Martin Fowler. So to avoid just reading what we like the most, quickly and easily present on a chart. So first we write failing tests. So we think from the perspective of the user, of the customer. And after that, when we have tests and all those tests failing, of course, because we have no code, we try to make this code, those tests just passing. And when we achieve it, we try to for the code that is to our company approach, to all those good practices, to all clean code, and so on. So it's like 3 steps, and actually it's never ending circle. So first you write failing tests, and after that you just have to refer it. What are the benefits? Well, actually, you can quite easily imagine that it helps programmers understand their code, because when you start thinking about how it should work and what it should do, instead of just start typing, it's much easier to imagine, okay, I have to implement it in that way. And at the same time, it forces you to keep good architecture. Because if you skip it, it becomes very messy. So you are forced to just keep it, to be focused on the good structure, good architecture. And of course, it makes much easier collaboration, especially among developers, because you have all the same approach. You need to communicate how we want to implement. And actually, if you are working on the same frequently, you should define it in common. Yeah, what kind of scenarios we should cover before we can start writing code. And that because it's test-driven development, so we are talking about tests, so it helps you to prevent defects. And that's the major idea behind right, and to capture it on the early stage of development, because it's almost the earlier stage of development. Yeah, it's even before we started writing code. So probably the only earlier stage is the phase of design or defining product requirements. But in terms of development, that's the earliest stage we can focus on. So, of course, we should answer the question when and why not to use TDD. Why? The answer why is because it's focused on method or function, which doesn't make sense for business. I was talking. We can talk about it a lot, but the main idea is to prevent the early stage of our development. Yeah, because it's even before we start. Why and when not to use it then? Well, at first, why it's focused on function and method, which is not the real business value for our stakeholders. Then it's difficult to maintain the very high number of unit tests with the project scaling up. So it needs a lot of consideration how we should approach it. The first thing is it's described at a level of is for this one is very, very hard to apply for already existing legacy code. So if you want to introduce it when we are a very mature company already, it can be tough and quite challenging. So then it comes BDD. And again, that's a history from down north. And the most thing is there were three very important points why he decided to do it. At first, programmers didn't want to write tests, and at the same time, which is quite impasse. Like we cannot do a lot about it. And then we have always business stakeholders not seeing any value in waiting time, just testing production code. So what about BDD? Like I mentioned, it's strongly connected with TDD, and it doesn't make sense to just introduce it without knowledge what TDD exactly is. And well, from the definition and from the concept description, it should allow you to unlock the proper communication between development and business. And the second thing is that it's just implementation of kind of unit test, but in a form of test scenarios, but focused on the proper activities from the user perspective. So what are the assumptions? Well, that's the whole process that is defined as a requirement. So we keep it as a requirements at the same time. Then it actually simulate our real system behavior. So we are just observer. We are the user trying to interact with our system. The first thing is that we are focused not only on the business, but on the customer as well. So we're trying to understand their needs. We're trying to understand what they can do with us, or what they can do, not only to use, but to break it as well. And it allows you to achieve maximum understanding between not just technical people, but the rest of the company, like analysts, product people, and so on. So the main concept of the BDD is to use natural language that can be fully for actually, it doesn't matter if you are technical or not. So this language is called Gherkin, and the Gherkin is kind of domain language as well. So how does it work? Well, at first, you have something that you can know very well because it's just user story. So as a user, I want to log in so that I can make the purchase or whatever you are working on as the product. And this kind of user story can be defined for And having that, you can just use it for defining your storage, your epics, and so on. I love this slide. It's presented by David Evans, like 3 or 4 years ago during agile testing days. That of course it's a great approach to have structured way of defining user stories, but it's too much on that. So if there is no sense to make it, just drop it. Like forcing people to do it for every task, for every even very technical one, you can have a result like here. So it's funny, but at the same time very unproductive. So let's start with the example. So what can be the example of Gherkin syntax? Well, we have function. Yep. For example, return goods that are added to the stock in the store. So we have a story. As a shop owner, I want to add return goods to the store to keep the stock updated in the store. That's the highest level of our abstraction. And then we have scenario. Return goods should go back to the stock in the store. And good thing is that you can put lots of scenarios for one function. And the same applies to test automation, of course. So given that client bought a black jumper from me earlier, and currently I have 3 black jumpers in the stock, when the client returns the jumper, then I should have 4 black jumpers in the stock, which totally makes sense. Like from the logic, 3 plus 1 is just 4. So what you could see here, well, at first we have function, logic here. Then we have narration that includes the person, so the role that gains some benefit, because that's the main point of user some benefits of those, and we can create what you already seen. So the story expressed as in a way I want to. Then we have acceptance criteria that are defined for this story. And for those acceptance criteria, we can create scenario containing of given, which is initial condition, when, which actually tells what kind of action to achieve that something, and then which is just our result. And we can combine it with and it's just like you know from logical perspective. It's when, and, or couple of ends. So those things must happen. But to sum up, what you should remember and what you should know is that we have given when then syntax, and given is responsible for conditions. When is the proper action, and then is something you can call assertion in automation or expected result. So that's the main concept. Yeah, we actually explained the major idea behind BDD, but is there something else you can use? Yep, of course there is, and those things are the biggest benefit you can get. So at first we have tables. So we can refine our scenarios in a form of tables as the table of data that can be parsed. So it simplifies a lot your scenarios. It allows you to avoid just adding another and so on, and just put it as a data in our scenarios. And the second thing is scenario outline. So defining examples. We have just one scenario, but we can define many different corner cases. And then it's very similar table. The biggest difference is that it will be iterated 3 times here. So the first one, it will be for bronze member that has 0 status point at first, and then gaining 300 points, and then we should have silver final status. And adding another row, this scenario will be executed 1 more time, and the 3rd time for gold. So as you can see, having just 1 table called examples and 1 scenario, you can execute it 3 times exactly. And we have 4 more things, and that's very useful for automation. So at first we have docstrings. If you work with code, you know it. It's just adding the well, actually the same as comments, but in a form of phrase, of paragraph. Then we have tags. So if you want to tag something as payment or smoke test, so you can just choose a subset of smoke tests to be executed faster and to have the smaller scope, so just covering the most important business scenarios. And background, which is repeating the same steps for every scenario. So you have functionality, and then you have multiple scenarios. If the first, second, or third step are repeating, you can extract it to background, and background will execute at first. So good practices. If we talk about how to implement, it's good to talk about good practices and what to avoid actually. The first thing is that scenarios should be declarative, not imperative. We have large but. So we shouldn't be focused on making it extremely declarative because we need to find the balance, of course. And I will show you on the example in a while. Dependencies between scenarios, because you can leave just, and I think that's applicable for any test automation. So avoiding dependencies between scenarios because we want to start every scenario from the scratch. So having just clear environment. And write specification to engage stakeholders, because there is no one that can give you more input to your scenarios than stakeholders. Like you can just transform or translate their expectations. And the last one, probably one of the most important, never try cases, because it will create you a huge scope that is very hard to maintain and to implement. Actually, both, like manually and in terms of automation. So good practice in terms of declarative versus imperative is to hide details, implementation details. So you can see it's very detailed here, but we don't really care about what do we exactly click and what we click later, what should be like all the elements that should be visible. We don't care about it. So the proper way to define it is what we do, not how we do, because how we can implement on a level of steps, so on a lower layer of abstractions. And we are interested mostly in what we have to do to achieve something. So we have here given, I have something in the shopping cart. I should see the price or delivery costs. So I'm not interested in how exactly to navigate. It should be hidden below. The second thing is just use specific examples. Don't make it too generic, because we need to test one of the flows. So writing any item is not the best solution here. We should be focused on the proper item. So for example, here we have just PDF book and MP3 song. The third one is to use the proper layer of abstractions. So when you look on those two, like of them, like all those two, are very well defined. All of them are fine. But it depends at which level you want to implement. So a little more technical or a little bit more general. And here you should find a balance with your product team and with the stakeholder. What do you exactly want to implement? What do you want to describe? So always involve stakeholders. Never do it alone, because after a couple of months you can hear like, but that's not what I expected. It has no value to me. So the best way is to involve stakeholders and to we should change something. So we can describe it in that way. At first we have TSL, then we have Gherkin, which is syntax, and then we have Cucumber. So just to recall the classical approach, and in terms of BDD approach, the beginning is pretty similar. So we have CO and PO, but then we have the whole development team working on functionality, working on scenarios to define it. And from that, for example, to use, we can use any meeting for that as well. You have scenarios like expressed in given when then syntax. And from that, you have developers that can use it for testing. And that's TDD. That's why I talked about TDD a lot. So at first you have scenarios. So what to do? What is the functionality? What is the business flow? Then you have QA. And then you have this increment we talked about. But the best value from this and then scenarios. And then we have, of course, customer. But we need to use some examples because, as mentioned, we cannot generalize a lot. And there is a concept called specification by example. So we have scenarios expressed in the exact example. The flow is pretty clear. So we have business goal, and then we have scope and user stories. We are thinking about key examples, what to cover, which paths to cover, what kind of edge cases. And then based on that, we can have specification with examples, so our BDD. After that, we have automation, so executable specification tests, and living documentation. So it's still evolving. So if any requirements change and the code change, we'll see it in our test automation. So we'll have to automate. We'll have to update it. Otherwise, it won't pass. So we're up to date. So let's look at the example. That's just L cases. That's calculating taxes and shipping price, and you have just clear the. So think about the key examples here, and I break it down to that kind of edge cases. So probably you know that approach. And the last one is maybe funny, but when I started thinking about it, I just realized that I would like to check what happens in this scenario when I choose one of not very popular countries. So that's why Zimbabwe. But it's up to you how you approach it. And if you have people around, right, product people and stakeholders and developers, you can probably identify much more. So after that, after you have key examples, you can transform it to you can transform into Gherkin syntax, which creates you test cases to automate. And in that case, as you can see, we used examples. So we have 5 scenarios covered by just one scenario outline. It's extremely simplified, and we are actually expressing what we want to do, not exactly how. So all those things like clicking below, logging, and so on is hidden on a lower level of abstraction. So on a level of steps. So my equation here is that BDD equals domain development plus test-driven development plus Gherkin syntax, adding specification by example, and acceptance testing. So all those 5 elements creates your behavior-driven development approach, and actually skipping one of them can create a lot of chaos, a lot of misunderstanding at some point. So I encourage and I recommend you to think about all of them. And outside in approach, as you know from many contexts, of course we have business goal, and that's always the most important. That's at first. Then we have functionalities and scope to be defined by product people. Then we have identified key examples, so we can call it edge cases as well. And based on that, we can create executable specification, so our steps. And on the lowest level, we can create the code. We can actually implement it. So implement steps, implement methods, implement functions, and so on. But that's not what I'm going to talk about it, because it's already technical aspect. But the most important is that all those things should be hidden on the lower level of abstraction. So 2 sentences for you. The first one is don't write automated tests, write executable specification. So in terms of BDD, thinking like that is much better, because if that have to be documentation, I don't care about those clicking, about those logging. I mean the exact data. So think about it as your further documentation as well. And that's actually how I work now. So that's not only automated, like all those standards are automated, but it's used for all product teams to understand, especially new joiners, because they don't know product well. So if they go through all our BDD scenarios, they can understand the product much better than I could explain. And don't write unit tests, just write low-level specification, which is a little bit closer to TDD approach. So takeaways, and actually you should focus now the most, because there are pros, and that's what I was talking about mostly. Well, you have ready and readable acceptance criteria, which is very important. The second one is that that creates easy way for automation and code reuse, because you can use the same step for multiple scenarios. So reusability in terms of code, in terms of steps, is just one of the principles, like programming principles. But much more important is that this is shift left trigger. So at first you have collaboration before you start automating, before you start coding. So you make a shift left trigger. You trigger the company to make this move. The second thing, and that's actually my subjective list, but the second thing is living documentation, because documentation is the biggest challenge, and not only challenge, this is very often just the biggest pain. And when you have it created and automated, you need to keep it up to date, because without updating it, you will have failing tests. And failing tests, when you have it in your delivery pipeline, won't allow you to deliver product at all. So basically, you are forced to keep it living. But the most important, from my perspective, it's easier and safer changes. So whatever you change, you need to update it. Whatever is from the business perspective is changed, whatever, if it applies to our values, edge values, or business workflows, you need to keep it up to date. You need to change it. But what about the problems? Well, there were many of them. And actually, I faced all of them, and that's why they were mentioned here. It doesn't work very well for silos project. It's useful only in an agile approach. But nowadays, I think it's pretty common It's like probably 99% of organizations calling them agile. If they are really agile or just calling agile, that's a different story. But at least they all try to be agile. But it won't work for silos project. Then badly written at start increases the cost of maintenance, and it's not linear, it's exponential. So the more you create, when you start in a bad way, creating in a bad way, gives you much more effort to maintain it, which equals much bigger cost. But the even more important is that BDD requires a lot of engagement and collaboration. So if you are just QAs having value from that, why do you want to create it? It has no real explanation. You can create it in a different way. You don't have to use BDD to define test cases. So if you are the only one and you cannot collaborate, cannot engage people to collaborate, just skip it. It doesn't make sense. It just gives you much more effort and another layer of abstraction to maintain. And the biggest problem is that it has no value if the only stakeholder is scenario creator. So if you are just the only one using it, drop it. It has no value, and the cost of maintaining it will just increase all the time, but the value will be the same, and that's actually no value. One more thing is that that applies not only to final testing. When we talk about performance, it can be created as well. So if we have any performance issues, any performance criteria, I would even say more, we can create it as well. And then when it's implemented in a good way, when there are requirements change, so for example, we want to scale from 1,000 users to 1 million users and decrease our response time from 5 milliseconds to 4 milliseconds, we can easily change it. So if you want to get deeper, I have two books for you. The first one is from John Ferguson-Smart. It's BDD in Action. And the second one is specification by example written by Gojko Ajic. In terms of tools, there are a huge number of them. I'm focused on Python nowadays, and there are at least 3 big frameworks, which is Behave, Lettuce, and Radish, as far as you remember. So all of them, or at least most of them, are named as the vegetable. But there are really many of them. And yeah, that's it. Thanks a lot. And let me check if there are any questions. Okay. I see there are no questions. So thanks a lot, guys. And have a nice day and nice rest of the conference.